Today's webinar is on how to amplify your return on investment with Sage Intacct. I've met most of you. I'm Deanna Brooks, the Strategic Account Manager for our Intacct practice here at LBMC Technology Solutions. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. All phone lines have been muted to eliminate any background noise. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know using the chat panel. We'll be taking questions through today's webinar, and we'll answer as many questions we can at the end of the presentation. You can submit your question via the questions panel in the WebEx. We'll also be recording this session and sending it out in a few days' time. So I'd like to take a moment to introduce you to Linda Pinion. Linda is a principal solution consultant at Sage Intacct. She has more than 25 years of experience helping customers with software solution selection and developing the people and resources to make it happen. We're very excited to have her join us this morning, and I will pass it off to her so she can more properly introduce herself. Linda.
Thank you so much, Deanna. So some of you I have probably met at Advantage, our customer conference. Some of you, perhaps you have been in a webinar or an event that I've done with LBMC. I have to tell you, just a quick sidebar, I love LBMC. I remember when they first joined Sage Intacct as a partner. I've been closely associated with them on many events and sales opportunities and love working with their team. I know they do a great job. And when we talked about this event specifically, you know, this is really for folks that have been using Sage Intacct and perhaps are not aware of some of the things that have come along as part of our continuous improvement to our solution footprint. And certainly there are other areas of Sage Intacct that you may be interested in. We chose 5, and we're touting this as the 5 add-ons that you need from Sage Intacct. So that's what our session is today. But what I want you to know is if you have other areas of your business that maybe, you know, you're interested in learning about what we have or where we're going, I know that Deanna and team at LBMC would love to talk to you about that. So even if you don't see something in the shopping cart that you want today, don't be afraid to share that with the LBMC team. As Deanna mentioned, I am with Sage Intacct, obviously. I'm a solution consultant. What that means is I'm part of the sales team and that I'm involved with the product. And one of the things that I think is really important for you to know is that, you know, we are continuously with our updates every quarter. We just experienced one a few days ago on Sunday. We're continuing to improve this product. So as I go through these 5 add-ons today, you may hear me say, well, you know, we released this in such and such time frame and we've done some enhancements to it. That is not unusual for us. And I'm going to turn off my video. You've seen my happy face here, so you know that I am the face behind the voice. But I'm just going to stop my video, and I'm going to go ahead and get started on the presentation. And as Deanna mentioned, post any of your questions in the chat box. We are recording today, so you'll have an option to have that recorded link. So if we take a look at where you're at today, it's really about protecting the investment that you've made in Sage Intacct. And for some of you, you may have been part of that selection or evaluation process. And as you chose Sage Intacct to be your accounting solution, there were some areas that probably were more important and you wanted to be able to address those first. Today, what we want to talk about is protecting everything that you've invested in the product, your time, your effort, and maybe even some processes that you have changed as you change to Sage Intacct. We also want to reemphasize what we're calling the intelligent organization, because like you, we've made enhancements to the way that we are doing things. we're now taking advantage of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And that is all part of the intelligent organization. You may have heard us talk about the intelligent general ledger, which is a component of that organization, along with making sure that as we adopt these new applications and these new enhancements, that we are continuing to automate processes and improve your efficiencies. That's going to give you increased time to benefit. And of course, you know, what everyone is concerned with today and some of the buzzwords that's out there is digital transformation. What does that mean, and where are we going to get the information? And more importantly, what can we do with it once we have that information? How is that moving us forward in the business world? So to address that, I want to talk about Take 5. And again, these are ones that we selected. However, there may be other areas that you want to have a deeper dive conversation into. And I know that there is a lot of information, recorded assets, and things that Deanna can share with you. But the 5 we're going to focus on today, Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. And many of these have acronyms, so SIBP, Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. Spend Management, Sage Intacct Dynamic Allocations, Sage Intacct Interactive Custom Report Writer. I will refer to it as ICRW, Interactive Custom Report Writer. And then one that's not a product per se, but we want to talk about the Sandbox. And some of you may be familiar with the Sandbox. Certainly if you were part of the original implementation, you probably had a Sandbox. So we want to revisit that and make sure that you know the benefits of renewing that Sandbox. So as I mentioned, you know, we're really talking about the vision of an intelligent organization. And when you think about the intelligent organization, realize that it's being powered by this intelligent GL, this general ledger that is now using AI and machine learning to look at what's happening on a frequent, repeatable basis to help make sure that we are alerting you and looking at the patterns of data that are occurring to make sure that we're being proactive in alerting you to things that maybe don't look quite right. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move along. But included in this intelligent organization are really 4 key components here. One is around budgeting and planning. And so, you know, when you think about budgeting and planning, you know, that's really a way for you to look at your resources, to look at how you're going to budget, maybe around headcount, so your people get involved in that decision process. The knowledge of the resources that you have can help you also impact your financial insights. When you think about something that's coming in Sage Intacct called intelligent time is a way for us to help automate that time entry using AI. And one of the things that managing your time identifies is where we can enhance or drive billing performance. So when you think about what is finance, budgeting and planning, people, and then analytics all have to do with the intelligent organization, it's a way for us to present that holistic view of your business. So when we start thinking about those Take 5, the first one that I want to address is budgeting. And we all know, if we've been a part of budgeting in any organization, that budgeting is a team sport. It's not something that typically one person does. And that's a good thing, and that's a not so good thing, because in the old way that we did budgeting, when we had multiple people inputting a budget or contributing to the budget, that meant that we had different versions, and we had everyone trying to contribute to the soup, so to speak, And it was kind of a mess when it all got together, and it was hard to manage, and it was hard to control and make sure that it was accurate. So now we're excited to present to you an all-in-one budgeting and planning solution that really dramatically improves your ability to collaborate. So work with your other team members closely on budgeting and planning so that you get that accurate for your leadership team. Now, budgeting and planning really is around these 4 components. It's around, being able to set out and plan. And part of that planning may be a forecast. And then looking at the reporting that comes out of that and being able to analyze. With budgeting and planning, we're going to streamline that process. We're going to make it easy for you to do those what-if scenarios, to create the annual plan and maybe even do some rolling forecasts, and to create those budget versus actual reports. Now, how do we look at where we're coming from and where we're going to? Again, the pain of spreadsheet budgeting. And for most of us who have done budgeting, that's where it has been done, in Excel. And as you can see here, we've all got our little Excel spreadsheet. And then, gosh, one person's got to take all of this and mush it back together into that one plan. And again, Excel is great, but there's some true pitfalls to that, making sure that it's accurate and that you haven't missed anything and you've got the latest version. When we look at budgeting and planning functionality, basically what we're looking at is a way for us to collaborate, for us to work together as a team, and to be able to put together our budget, whether it be our initial budget or whether we're trying to do some forecasting and modeling against that budget, doing those what-if scenarios. Well, what if this number changes? What if we increase our travel to $1,000? What does that do to the outcome? Being able to do those complex calculations and knowing that as we're doing all of this, we are recording it in an audit trail. And that's important because we want to be able to go back and see exactly, what was done. We want to look at how this is going to work in Sage Intacct. And this is a bi-directional data flow. So when we look at this, we're going to look at being able to have this pre-built connection between budgeting and planning and financials. To get started, all you really need to do is to import your dimensions and your actuals to Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. And then you're able to create budgets, run those budget versus actual reports, do those what-if analysis, and maybe build out some different models and create forecasts. Then you have the power to export your budgets back to Sage Intacct. It's really just that simple. So when you think about how you budget today, and when you talk to the LBMC team, they're going to want to know, how do you budget? What dimensions are you pulling in? How many entities do you have? So that we can get an idea of how we want to set that up. So just think about what a difference this would make if you had this bi-directional data flow. And just to emphasize that, let's talk about painful to powerful. So one of the things that I talked about earlier was spreadsheets. And we all know that copying and pasting is one of the skill sets that we take with us. You no longer have to do that because now with just a few clicks, you've got that pre-built connection to Sage Intacct. When you look at those spreadsheets, they don't have the what-if scenarios on them. They're not set up to perform that way. So now with Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning, you can run unlimited what-if scenarios, and you can do that on the fly whenever you choose to. You invest hours. Well, maybe I should change that. You don't invest. You spend hours building budgets and plans by entity. Now you're going to be able to execute that in minutes when you have SIBP. And then being unable to make timely budget versus actual comparisons. So how many hours do you spend pulling that information together from spreadsheets and emails? And with SIBP, you'll be able to do that very easily. Run those budget versus actuals, do those reforecasts, and create rolling forecasts. And I just want to say here that I've talked to several customers over the course of the summer who have said, you know, having a real budgeting tool has helped us. It helped us before March of this year. But since March, and we had already done our budgeting by the time March got here, since March, we have redone our budget 2 or 3 times. And so, you know, because we've had businesses change, because our economy has changed over the last several months, people have had to take a closer look at their budget. And so those that didn't have this tool to help them have really been in a real hurt area, because budgeting takes time, and they've gone through this pain multiple times over. They thought budgeting was done. And when they had to go back and rebudget, they had to go back through that pain again. So just think about, you know, if you had SIBP and you had to do this rebudgeting, how much easier it would have been. So when we look at budgeting and planning, and again, this is something that's been out for some period of time now, we are continuing to enhance this application. So we're looking at more budget structure options versus, you know, with the wizard that we've created. We're also now going to be able to include statistical account integration with the intelligent general ledger, and we're working on single sign-on. Along the way, we're enhancing some things for the management tools for administrators, and of course, expanding that budget size so that we can support larger organizations. This is not uncommon for us. Whenever we release a new application, we always listen to your feedback, and then we come back and we make enhancements. So if you looked at budgeting and planning before, you may want to come back and look at it again, because I'm sure some things have been improved and changed since you looked at it. So moving on to number 2 of our Take 5. The question here is, are you out of control? And I don't know how many of us would admit that this week. Next week, probably some of us will admit that we're out of control since it's our Thanksgiving week. But the interest here is around, in your business, how are you controlling spend? And there's a great metric here from Everest Group Research that says a 5 to 10% reduction in non-core or indirect spend can translate in a 1 to 3% bottom line impact. So what does this mean to you? It means that every dollar that you save is a dollar that goes to the bottom line. And I don't know any company or organization that's not interested in increasing the bottom line. The real question here is, what will you do with the extra savings? So let me introduce you to spend management. And spend management is a separate SKU. It's one that a lot of people have looked at from a specific vertical early on, and that vertical was not-for-profit. It was something that we heard from the folks in that vertical loud and clear. We need a better way to control our purchasing and make sure that we are not overspending against our budget. So we released Spend Management and initially had a great uptake from the NSP vertical. However, there isn't a company, profit or nonprofit, on the planet that doesn't want to control spend and be better stewards of their budget. So when you set up Spend Management, you are integrating with a company budget. So part of that configuration is to point to a budget. What that provides you is an insight window into how much you've spent, how much your budget is and how much you're trying to spend at that very moment. It looks at really where that spending is occurring based against that budget. Now, as you are entering or attempting to enter that purchase, it can automatically stop you from overspending based on the budget, or it can warn you. So that's a choice when you set up your configuration. That's going to help you have better control. Without looking over someone's shoulder, you now can utilize the technology to help prevent you from overspending. So a few more things about spend management. Again, it's going to look at the budget. It's going to look at a starting date and the duration. So this is part of that configuration that I talked about. It's going to look at the dimensions and transaction definitions that apply. So as an example, you might say, if it is a transaction definition that's a purchase requisition, I want you at the time I enter the purchase requisition to look at that particular account, maybe it's office supplies, against a particular budget, current year, and I want you to pull up that Spend Insight window and let me know if I have the funds available to spend. It can also include committed. So if you're using committed and you've possibly set up a user-defined book for committed expenses, that's an option you can turn on in the configuration as well. Again, you have the ability to stop or warn. And, you know, one of the things that I've learned over the course of the last 2 or 3 years is most people are setting this to a warning and not a hard stop. Either way, if you reach that threshold, it has a way automatically in the background through workflow to notify the budget administrator. And then, of course, you have dimension-based validation. So you can validate those budgets by any dimension, whether those are predefined dimensions through Sage Intacct or ones that you have created as user-defined dimensions. So continuing on, just a couple of other points here on the features. You know, as I talked about committed expenditures, this is something, again, that people are using a user-defined book to capture. You can then look at committed expenses but not yet released expenditures. So that's another way to utilize that, that committed area. And it really ensures that your budget is kept within the limit. If you change the budget, so if you make some budget changes, it handles those changes going forward. It does not go back and affect the past transactions. And of course, as I mentioned, with a single click, you have a little Spend Insight window that shows right above your transaction line that you can open up, and it will give you all of that information. It'll show you the account, it'll show you the budget, it'll show you committed if you have turned that on in the configuration. It will show you actual, it will show you this purchase, it will calculate that and show you whether or not you have the funds available. At that point, it then kicks into whether it warns you or stops you from making that transaction. Now, before we leave spend management, I just want to share this flow with you because this is really reality. For those of you who may not be aware, accounts payable and purchasing both have the ability to use the workflow approvals. So if you are someone who's not using purchasing at all, you can still do bill approval in accounts payable. I like to say that, you know, if some things go through purchasing because of a dollar value or the type of item that it is, then use purchasing for those particular items and purchases. It's all configurable. You have your different transaction definitions. You can use that workflow approval to approve those. It can be multiple approvers instead of just one. On the accounts payable side, again, configurable. It's nothing extra. You just set up some configuration. You can define and design your approval policies, and it may be based on a value approval. So use those two interchangeably. And then when you want that added level of control on your spend, then lay spend management on top of that. So spend management works with general ledger, AP, and purchasing. And again, remember, it can be a warning or it can be a hard stop. There's a full audit trail that is captured as you're making these transactions. Now, the reality is the fourth bullet here, and that is that most people are using a hybrid. They're using some things for AP, some things for purchasing. They're encapsulating that across spend management, and they're using the system in a very smart way. So think about this hybrid model. It may be something that you are not aware of that you could access and use today. So the next area that we want to talk about is closing the month. And I know when I was in the accounting team that when it was month end, no one got to take vacation. No one got to be basically missing in action, because being part of that team was important. We had a deadline. We had things that we needed to get done, because in the company that I worked for, we had to close the books by the 5th day of the next month. So again, anything that would have helped us from a procedural way or a software way would have been totally welcome. And perhaps, you know, you're looking at ways that you can speed up that month-end close. So let's talk about dynamic allocations. And dynamic allocations is, you know, something that we released, I believe it was 2018 R4 is when dynamic allocations came out. And so it's been out for a couple of years now almost, and we've made some enhancements to this application, and we're continuing to do that. But one of the things that I want to point out is that at the end of the month, for lots of companies, they are looking at some closing entries to close out the books. And one of those is usually preparing, and if you're not automating this, you're doing this manually, preparing those journal entries to allocate revenue and expenditures. So what dynamic allocations does is it takes that source, or if you follow along from left to right on the slide, it takes that source of money, so that bag of money, and it applies a basis and a target to create the journal entry automatically and have that drill down to the source and basis. So we're going to eliminate that manual journal entry, and we're going to do that by way of you setting up a dynamic allocation. Now, if you think about a dynamic allocation, it's really focused on getting you the true performance analysis and gain the visibility into the loaded cost for departments and projects and other areas of your business. You can set up multiple allocation definitions, so it's not a one and done. When you specify the criteria to identify the source transaction that needs to be allocated, so that's the bucket of money or the bag of money, and then you select or specify the basis or method in which you want to calculate those allocations, and then specify the target book to record the allocated amount. And then the last step, of course, is us creating that journal entry. And that journal entry can, be recorded and posted automatically. You may want to have it one that gets approved, which you can certainly do that as well. So what this application is designed to do is to save you time and to reduce the errors and to increase auditability. So if you think about what do you do at the end of the month to get these costs allocated correctly, how much time does that take? How many times do you have to go back and proof it and make sure that you didn't make any errors? And then how easy is it for you to get back to that detail? we're going to eliminate all of that. We're going to make that a seamless, automated process. So what I chose to do here is to show you a couple of screens directly from my environment. This happens to be my not-for-profit environment, but to show you these screens to say, you know, this is how you're going to go in and define or set up an allocation definition. So you'll define it, you'll give it an ID and describe it, and then you'll go through some sections here to identify the source pool, to look at the dimensions, to look at the basis, and to give it the information that it needs. You know, what book, what account groups, where am I getting this, what accounts am I posting to and from. So this is going to give you your setup for those allocations. And then when the allocation is performed, you're going to get a journal entry that looks something like this. That's going to show you with drill down all the information that's in the journal entry. So you can see this is one that's around other benefits and where I am hitting that 5127 account and fund, and then I'm offsetting that to make my journal entry for this cost allocation. There's also a history tab, and that history tab will record when this was done and the user that performed it. So again, just making sure that this is an advanced way for you to do those pooled allocations with the ones that you do at the end of the month. And it is a separate subscription. Now, just to remind you, with your core Sage Intacct bundle, so everyone has this capability to create transaction allocations. So transaction allocations are different than dynamic allocations. Transaction allocations happen at the transaction level. At the time you enter the transaction is when you apply a transaction allocation rule. You can set up as many of those rules as you choose to as well. So as an example, you might get a bill in from an advertising agency, and you are using this agency for all of your companies. You're a multi-entity organization. You get that one bill from the advertising company, and you want each one of your entities to pay their fair share. So you could take that AP invoice, enter it into AP, point to an allocation template or rule, and based on that rule, it would do the math for you. So Intacct would do the math and split that bill however you set up the rule. And this is an example here on the screen of a rule that was set up around a percentage. So this was one that we were doing around general overhead. You have three different ways that you can set up a transaction allocation. It can either be by percent, it can be an exact amount, so an absolute amount, or it can be a fixed amount with an over-under logic. Again, you have the ability to have an attachment here with it, but this is how you can get Sage Intacct to do the math for you and to split that out automatically. What does that do for you? Well, one, it creates all of those expenses and posts them in the right place for you. It also eliminates you from needing to enter that AP invoice multiple times, because you enter the invoice once, you point to the allocation template, and then post that AP invoice, and all of that transaction data goes into the proper entity and dimension. So just remember, transaction allocations, they are part of your core bundle. If you're not taking advantage of them today, you might want to look at that. Now, a couple things I just want to mention before we close out allocations, and that is that we have made an enhancement in R3 of this year so that now those dynamic allocations can cross entities and base currency. So this may be something that was a limitation to you before when you evaluated dynamic allocations and you kind of held back. This is an update that was done in R3. So again, you may want to come back and revisit dynamic allocations. So the next one that we want to go to is transforming the data. So one of the things that most people are interested in when they are evaluating software is they're looking for a way to access information. And it may be news to you, it may not be, that today we have more data than we've ever had. You know, a lot of us say, well, reporting is our number one issue. We just, we can't get the reports that we need. And in the past, sometimes it was because we didn't have the data. Today, fast forward, we have a lot of data. In fact, we have so much data that sometimes we don't even realize where all that data is and all the things that we can do with that data. So let's talk about transforming the data. So one of the things that I would tell you is Sage Intacct has lots of ways to get at the data. You know that you have a financial report writer and you have a custom report writer and you have standard reports that are already created for you, both across the subsystems and the financial area. You know that there's a lot of things that are kind of pre-populated for you when you initially implement Sage Intacct. There are some other things that we've added and we are continuing to add that will help you access the data in a different way, and perhaps in some cases a more complex way, because you're wanting the data to give you different types of information than what you did 5 years ago. So we're introducing a purpose-built reporting tool, ICRW, Interactive Custom Report Writer, and it's one that allows you to really do more across the data than what you currently can do with the other two report writers. The other two report writers are purpose-built as well. They have a purpose, and that is to help you provide your financial reports and your operational reports, if you will. The Interactive Custom Report Writer is a more advanced report writing tool, and we're going to learn a little bit more about it as we go through this section. Now, there's one other area that I just want to mention over here on the right-hand side, something that you may not be familiar with. It's called Data Delivery Services, and it's another way for us to get to the data, and that is through DDS, which is our acronym for Data Delivery Service. You can extract large amounts of Sage Intacct data and pull that out and send it to a data warehouse. This is a separate application as well. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, we're not covering that today, but I want you to know that's part of the whole reporting area as well. Now, I'm not going to go into detail over these next two slides. However, the slides are available to you afterwards, and if there's nothing else in this slide deck that is of interest to you, these two slides probably will be. We put these together because we have different ways to do reporting in Sage Intacct. And we've got 3 columns here. There's a different type of reporting, the capabilities of that type of reporting, and then some examples of reports that you would use with that report type. You'll notice underneath report type, we've also labeled them with core or subscription. Core means that everybody who subscribes to Sage Intacct gets that as part of that core bundle. If it says subscription, like it says underneath Interactive, that means it's a separate SKU or separate subscription. It's in addition to. So I think this is really helpful, and that's why I wanted you to have it. It's kind of a cheat sheet that says, you know, we have this reporting type that's a financial report writer. Well, what are some of the features or capabilities that you can do with that tool? And then what are some of the examples that you can get out of that reporting tool? Same thing with standard reports. Standard reports, ones that we've already created for you. What are some of those examples? A bills register, an AP aging. The custom report writer, what do we do with that? And what are some examples there? And then as you go through, and there's two screens to this, as you go through, I've listed out some other report types as well. Dashboards are even a report type, because now, this is a way for you to get at the data and drill down to the source transaction, and, what is that going to help you do, and how's that going to help your users? And then the scheduler. The scheduler is something that if you want to schedule a report or a group of reports, you can do that. And then, of course, data delivery services at the bottom, again, another subscription. So when you get this deck, these are 2 slides that you may want to carve out and just, pass around to your team, because it's important reporting information. But let's talk specifically about ICRW. So the Interactive Custom Report Writer, what in the heck is this thing, and why would I be interested in it? Well, first of all, it was released back in 2018. So again, been out for a couple years, not a new thing on the list. It's a way for you to have a more powerful way to create reports. So it's what we are deeming to be business intelligence, or BI. So you may be familiar with that term. You may not be familiar with WYSIWYG. WYSIWYG is what you see is what you get. And the net of that is when you start to design a report and create it, it's going to be able to show you exactly what it looks like as you are creating it. So it's very visual, and it allows you to drag and drop. It allows you to start out with this blank canvas and pick the fields that you want on the report, drag them over, reorganize them, decide how you want them to be calculated. So what kind of calculations do you want to perform in the columns, how you want the groupings and the subtotaling and the formatting, and then, of course, the ability to export it to different views like a PDF or Excel or PowerPoint. Additionally, what's equally important is that we have built a reporting library. So what that means is you're going to have access to 60+ pre-built reports. So when you subscribe to ICRW, you're going to get a pre-built library. It's by application. There are, anywhere from 8 to 10 reports in each application that have already been created. You can use them straight up, or you can copy them and create your own version. It's the same principle that we do in the financial report writer. So these are reports we've already created for you. Now, why do people switch and start using ICRW for some of their reporting? I already have the financial report writer. I have 120 standard reports. I have the custom report writer. Why do I need ICRW? What could I possibly do with that new report writer? Well, I'm going to give you a quick example. Most everyone knows AP. In the accounts payable standard reports, we have an AP aging. When you access that report, one of your choices there in the criteria is detail or summary. If you run it detail, you get all of the detail of each individual invoice. If you run it summary, you get summary numbers bucketed into your aging bucket. You cannot get both detail and summary on the same report out of your standard AP aging report. However, with ICRW, I have taken and married those two reports together. So what you're looking at here is both a detail and a summary AP aging. So on the left-hand side, you see an AP vendor aging summary title. You see some things highlighted in a green color there. Those are the vendors. and you see my aging with my summary numbers for each one of my vendors. As I highlight a vendor on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, up pops all of the details. So in this case, neighborhood printers and stationery is the one I've highlighted. They have their summary on the left-hand side with a total, and then the detail of all of the invoices on the right-hand side. Now, one thing I will add to this. When I designed this report, I did not design drill down into the right-hand detail. I could have done that, which probably makes sense. If I wanted to, I then would be able to click on any of those bills, and it would take me right into AP and do that same drill down that we know and love, get me to that source level of the transaction. So I've taken two reports, combined them together. I've done this with ICRW. So this is just a quick example. It is one of the standard reports that we've included in the library. Now, again, there's a couple of other things I want to tell you about this report writer. Two different types of users. In most organizations, we found that there are one or two people that are power users, ones that want to create reports, and they also want to be able to execute reports. If you have someone in your organization that can do that, then you would want to subscribe and make them a report builder or power user. If you do not have someone in your organization that, I like to say, if they don't have that in their DNA, then you may still want to subscribe to ICRW, but subscribe as a report consumer. And a consumer is someone who can do just that. They can run the report. So you've got those 60 reports already created for you. And if you need additional reports, that's when you come back to LBMC. You sit down with their team, you define and design what you need. They will build that report for you through a statement of work. And then you will, again, have access to run or execute that report. At any time, if you decide, well, you know, we don't want to be a consumer, we want to be a builder, you can switch that user type. There are different price points for those subscriptions, and that's something that Deanna can help you with and help you determine what type of users you need. You may want to start out as a consumer and then move to a builder. You may start immediately as a builder and take advantage of the reporting library and be able to create your own report. So lots of options here for how you choose to use ICRW. I would just tell you that in closing for ICRW, the top two reasons that people switch to ICRW and start using it is because, one, it allows you to create pivot tables, and two, it allows you to do more complex calculations in the column. Now, one of the things that we've also done recently in R3 is we allow you to create your own groupings. So now you can create your own data library. So you can do those joins, those table joins. So if you want to do a report across different applications, you now can group those together. So we're continuing to enhance ICRW. All right, so our last Take 5 is around playtime, and who doesn't like playtime? So playtime is good. One of the things that most of our customers do, and I'm sure many of you did, during your implementation, when you initially got settled in with LBMC and they were helping you in defining what your implementation was going to look like, they more than likely recommended that you get a Sandbox. And a Sandbox is an exact copy of your production environment. And when you are implementing, it's very helpful because you can then, instead of doing your testing and your scripting and educating and all of that in your production, you can then do that in your Sandbox. and it doesn't hurt anything, because again, it's, we're playing, we're testing, we're, thinking how we want to change a process, and we're trying it different ways. After you go live, sometimes people don't think that they need to continue the sandbox. And I would, my vote is that you rethink that you reconsider that if you are not using a sandbox today. Now, there's a couple things I want to point out. As you know, when we go through a release, everybody that's using Sage Intacct gets the release. There's no opting out. So that means if you have a sandbox, it's going to get updated with the new release things as well. However, if you have a sandbox, you will need to do some updating in that sandbox yourself. So if you change some things, if you want to, make sure that everything is working just right, the sandbox is your responsibility. But we're going to go ahead and update that sandbox with the release. The reason that I feel like you should continue, and there are lots of folks that would agree with me here, is because your business will continue to evolve. You'll have new users come in. You'll maybe want to revisit a process or change a process. You may be a company that's in acquisition mode. You may be acquiring other companies, which also means processes and people that will be new to the fold. You may be taking advantage of some of these new modules. So you may want to look at some of the add-ons and have that as a way that you can play and test those new modules. And then your company may be thinking about going global. So again, all of these reasons really point to the benefit of you having that sandbox in place. And we really feel like for the money, it is the best investment that you can make to make sure that you are getting the most out of Sage Intacct and using it to its full ability. So in closing today, I just want to finish up by reminding you that we've talked about 5 things today: budgeting and planning, spend management, dynamic allocations, interactive custom report writer, and the sandbox. There are many other areas that you can improve your landscape with Sage Intacct. So if there's something that we didn't touch on today, please go back and jingle the phone and reach out to Deanna. I know she'll be reaching back as well. Make sure that we have an opportunity to talk to you about whatever your requirements are. On behalf of myself and Sage Intacct, I want to thank you for continuing to support us and to support our products, and certainly our partner, LBMC. And I'll just stop here and ask Deanna, is there anything coming through the chat that I can answer?
Yes, we did have a question about dynamic allocations. A person asked, how about allocations by headcount?
Yes, absolutely, and that's something that a lot of folks do. So you can actually use transaction allocations for some of those calculations for headcount as well. But if you really want to get specific and you want to do this at the end of the month as more of a pooled allocation, so enter all those transactions for the month, and then at the end of the month, apply that using that basis and that target, then dynamic allocations is the way to go.
Fantastic. And there was another question regarding the cost of a sandbox, which I can answer. The cost of the sandbox is 10% of your total Intacct subscription. So it's based on your actual subscription.
Okay. And I would just ask you that, Deanna, that is a renewable thing, correct? The sandbox is a renewable item?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And it can be added to the subscription at any time. You do not need to wait for renewal to add it.
Okay, and that's an important point too, because some people may have dropped it and then, want to, their situation has changed and they want to take advantage of turning that back on. So that's a good thing to know as well.
Absolutely. Well, there's no other questions, but if there are any, everybody has my email address. If you have any questions, I'm always here to answer. I've already gotten a few that come in, so just know that I'll be reaching out and touching base with you shortly. But we certainly appreciate your time. Thank you, everyone.